Wood is supposed to rot when it stays wet. That is what most people believe. Wet wood swells, softens, darkens, and eventually breaks down. So why did some builders in the past do the exact opposite of what we would do today? Why did they sometimes keep wood underwater on purpose? Not for days, not for a quick rinse, for months, sometimes much longer, and somehow, in the right conditions, that made the wood last longer, not shorter. That sounds wrong, but across Europe, there are clues that this strange logic worked. Ancient beams and old structures, waterlogged timber recovered centuries later, foundation piles that remained in place for generations. Medieval builders did not have chemistry labs. They did not have pressure-treated lumber. They did not have modern sealants. But they did understand one thing extremely well. Nature has rules, and if you work with those rules instead of against them, wood can last far longer than most people think. The first rule was simple. Rot does not happen because wood gets wet. Rot happens because organisms start feeding on the wood, and most of the time, that process needs oxygen. That is the key. When timber sits in an oxygen-poor environment, decay can slow down dramatically. Not every time, not in every condition, but in the right waterlogged environment, wood can survive far longer than people expect. That is why submerged piles and buried wet timbers sometimes remain surprisingly solid. Not because water is magical, because the environment becomes hostile to the normal cycle of decay. And builders learned that from observation long before they could explain it scientifically. They saw that some wood stored in the wrong place rotted fast, but some wood kept in still, cool, oxygen-poor conditions changed differently. It became heavier, denser, more stable. Soaking also did something else. It helped remove sugars, sap, and other compounds that attract insects and feed decay. That meant the wood was not just preserved, it was less appetizing. And that is where this gets really interesting, because water was only the beginning. Once the wood came back out, the next step was patience. Modern builders often rush timber. Cut it. Dry it fast. Use it quickly. But older builders understood that speed creates weakness. Wood dried too fast can crack, twist, split, warp. Stress builds inside it. So after soaking or after felling, timber was often dried slowly and carefully, not blasted by heat, not thrown into harsh sun, but allowed to settle gradually. That slow drying mattered. Because strong wood is not just wood that survives the weather, it is wood that stays stable under pressure. And medieval builders were obsessed with stability. They were building roofs, halls, bridges, barns, gates, towers. If the timber moved too much, joints failed. If it cracked, water got in. If water got in and air followed, rot began. So they slowed everything down. And then came the second trick, fire. This is the part most modern people find even stranger, because once the wood had been prepared, some builders deliberately charred the surface. Not burned to ash, not destroyed, just darkened, a controlled outer layer. At first glance that sounds reckless. Why would you damage wood to protect it? Because a light char changes the surface. It creates a carbon-rich outer skin that helps resist moisture, insects, and weather. It is not invincible, but it can be surprisingly effective. And more importantly, it protects the most vulnerable part of the timber first, the outside. That is where rain hits. That is where insects land. That is where rot begins. A lightly charred beam or post could handle exposure better than raw wood left untreated. And when combined with proper drying and proper installation, the result could last a very long time. That was the genius of the method. It was never just one secret. It was a sequence. Cut carefully, store carefully, dry carefully, protect the surface. Then install the wood in a way that worked with the environment, not against it. And builders were not done yet, because after water and fire came sealing. Long before hardware stores sold cans of synthetic wood treatment, craftsmen were using natural coatings. Resins, waxes, oils, tars. These were not decorative. They were defensive. A good seal helped keep moisture swings under control. It helped shed rain. It helped slow surface damage. And in some cases, it made the wood far less welcoming to insects. Think about how intelligent that system was. First, reduce what feeds decay. Then dry the wood slowly. Then harden the outer surface. Then seal it. That is not superstition. That is process. And the most impressive part is that it came from observation, not theory. These people did not need a textbook to notice patterns. They saw which posts failed first, which roofs lasted longest, which beams stayed sound, which woods cracked, which ones twisted, which treatments were worth the effort. Over generations, that becomes knowledge. And over enough generations, it becomes craft. There was one more detail they understood that many people still ignore now. Timing mattered. Trees cut in the wrong season can hold more sap and more moisture. Trees cut in colder periods were often preferred because the wood was calmer, less active, less loaded with what decay organisms love. Again, not magic, just pattern recognition. So when people today look at old structures and ask, how did this wood survive so long? The answer is usually not one miracle ingredient. It is a chain of smart decisions. The tree was chosen well, the timing was right, the wood was handled slowly, sometimes soaked, sometimes charred, often sealed, and always respected. That is the real lesson. The medieval world did not preserve wood because it had secret chemicals. It preserved wood because it understood limits. It knew that durability is not something you spray on at the end. It starts long before the beam reaches the building. And maybe that is why so much modern material feels temporary. We try to force speed into everything. Fast growth, fast drying, fast building, fast replacement. But older builders were aiming at a different target entirely: longevity. They were not asking, how cheaply can we finish this? They were asking, how do we make this endure? That is a different mindset, and it leaves different results behind. So yes, wood should rot in water. Under normal conditions, it often does. But in the right environment with the right follow-up, water could become the first step in preserving it. That is the paradox. The thing that usually destroys wood could, under controlled conditions, help prepare it to last longer. And that is what makes this old method so fascinating. Not because it is mystical, because it is practical. It reminds us that some of the toughest materials in history were not protected by modern chemistry. They were protected by patience, sequence, and respect for how nature actually works. If you enjoy forgotten building methods and lost practical knowledge like this, subscribe. And if this changed the way you think about wood, leave a like and share it with someone who would appreciate it. Because sometimes the past did not survive by accident. Sometimes it survived because people understood something we forgot.